Thank you for watching Gaby's cheating stories. Please subscribe. It just take 1 second. Thank you.
I never thought my love story was going to be this way, and with someone who I saw as the love of my life. But here we are. Hello, my name is Hannah, and the first time I saw John Paul, it was at the harbor. The sun was setting, casting a golden hue over the water, and the air was thick with the scent of salt and fish. He was standing by his boat, his hands calloused from years of work, his face weathered by the sun and wind. There was something about him that drew me in, something raw and untamed. He looked up and caught my eye, and for a moment, the world seemed to stand still. I felt a flutter in my chest, a sensation I hadn't felt in years. He smiled, a slow, easy smile that made my heart race. I knew right then that he was someone special. We started talking, and I found myself captivated by his stories of the sea. He spoke with a passion that was infectious, his eyes lighting up as he described the thrill of the catch, the beauty of the ocean at dawn. There was a depth to him, a quiet strength that I admired. He was different from anyone I had ever met, and I found myself wanting to know more about him, to be a part of his world. We spent hours talking that day, and by the time the sun had fully set, I knew that I was falling for him. Our connection grew stronger with each passing day. We would meet at the harbor, and he would take me out on his boat, showing me the wonders of the sea. I felt alive in a way I never had before, as if I had finally found my place in the world. He was kind and gentle, yet there was a wildness to him that excited me. I knew that I was falling in love with him, and it scared me. But I couldn't help myself. He had become a part of me, and I knew that I would do anything to keep him in my life. As the weeks turned into months, our relationship deepened. John Paul was everything I had ever wanted in a partner, strong, dependable, and loving. He had a way of making me feel safe, as if nothing in the world could harm me as long as he was by my side. We spent our days exploring the coastline, our nights wrapped in each other's arms. He would tell me stories of his adventures at sea, and I would listen, captivated by the way his voice would rise and fall with the rhythm of the waves. But it wasn't just the grand gestures that made me fall for him, it was the little things. The way he would hold my hand as we walked along the beach, the way he would look at me when he thought I wasn't watching. He had a way of making me feel cherished, as if I were the most important person in the world to him. And in those moments, I knew that I had found my soulmate. Our love was passionate and all-consuming. We would spend hours talking about our dreams and aspirations, our fears and insecurities. He was my confidant, my rock, my everything. And as our love grew, so did our desire to build a life together. We talked about getting married, about starting a family. And though the thought of committing to someone so completely was terrifying, I knew that I couldn't imagine my life without him. He had become my everything, and I was ready to take the leap. Our wedding day was everything I had ever dreamed of and more. The ceremony was held on the beach, with the sound of the waves crashing against the shore as our backdrop. The sun was setting, casting a warm, golden glow over everything. I walked down the aisle, my heart pounding in my chest, my eyes locked on John Paul. He looked so handsome in his suit, his eyes filled with love and adoration as he watched me approach. As we exchanged our vows, I felt a surge of emotion unlike anything I had ever experienced. I promised to love him, to stand by him through thick and thin, to be his partner in all things. And as he made the same promises to me, I knew that we were bound together in a way that was unbreakable. We were no longer just two individuals. We were a team, a unit, a family. The reception was a joyous celebration of our love. We danced under the stars, surrounded by our friends and family. It was a night filled with laughter and love, a night that I would cherish for the rest of my life. And as we drove away from the reception, hand in hand, I knew that our journey was just beginning. We had a lifetime of adventures ahead of us, and I couldn't wait to see where the road would take us. After we got married, John Paul continued his work as a fisherman. It was a demanding job, one that required him to be away from home for weeks at a time. But I understood his passion for the sea, and I supported him in his career. He would come home with stories of his adventures, his eyes shining with excitement as he described the thrill of the catch. I loved seeing him so happy, and I knew that his work was a part of who he was. But as the months went by, I began to feel the weight of his absence. The days without him were long and lonely, and I found myself counting down the hours until he would return. I missed his presence, his warmth, his love. I missed the way he would hold me at night, the way he would make me laugh with his silly jokes. And though I tried to stay strong, I couldn't help but feel a sense of emptiness when he was gone. John Paul's company was expanding, and he was often called away for longer periods of time. He would leave early in the morning, before the sun had even risen, and I would watch him go, my heart heavy with longing. I knew that his work was important, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was losing him to the sea. And as the days turned into weeks, I began to feel a growing sense of unease, a fear that our love was being tested in ways I hadn't anticipated. The longer John Paul was away, the harder it became for me to cope. I threw myself into taking care of Lucas, trying to fill the void with the love and attention I gave to our son. But no matter how much I tried to distract myself, I couldn't escape the loneliness that gnawed at my heart. I missed John Paul more than I could put into words, and I found myself longing for the days when we were together, when our love felt so strong and unshakable. I tried to stay connected to John Paul through phone calls and messages, but it wasn't the same. The distance between us felt insurmountable, and I began to feel as though we were drifting apart. I knew that he loved me, that he was doing his best to provide for our family, but I couldn't help but feel abandoned. I needed him more than ever, and I didn't know how to bridge the gap that was growing between us. As the months went by, I began to feel a sense of resentment building inside me. I resented the sea for taking him away from me, resented his job for keeping him away from our family. And though I tried to push those feelings aside, they continued to grow, festering in the back of my mind. I knew that I needed to talk to John Paul about how I was feeling, but I was afraid. Afraid that he would think I was being selfish, afraid that he would pull away even more. And so, I kept my feelings to myself, hoping that things would get better, that the distance between us would somehow close on its own. The loneliness became unbearable. I felt like a ghost in my own home, going through the motions of daily life without any real sense of purpose. Lucas was my only source of joy, but even he couldn't fill the void that John Paul's absence had left in my heart. I missed him so much it hurt, and I found myself longing for the days when we were together, when our love felt so strong and unshakable. The nights were the worst. The silence in the house was deafening, and I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if John Paul was thinking of me, if he missed me as much as I missed him. It was during one of these lonely nights that I met Ralph. He was John Paul's assistant, and he had come by the house to drop off some paperwork. I hadn't paid much attention to him before, but that night, he stayed to talk. He was kind and attentive, and for the first time in months, I felt seen. He listened to me, really listened, and I found myself opening up to him in a way I hadn't with anyone else. He had a way of making me feel understood, as if he could see the pain I was trying so hard to hide. And in that moment, I felt a connection with him that I hadn't felt in a long time. As the weeks went by, Ralph became a regular presence in my life. He would stop by the house to check on me, to see how I was doing. He was always so thoughtful, bringing little gifts for Lucas and offering to help with chores around the house. I found myself looking forward to his visits, to the way he made me feel less alone. And though I knew it was wrong, I couldn't help but feel a growing attraction to him. He was everything John Paul wasn't: present, attentive, and always there when I needed him. But deep down, I knew that I was treading on dangerous ground, that the connection I felt with Ralph was a fragile thread that could unravel everything I had built with John Paul. Yet, in my loneliness, I clung to it, desperate for the comfort it provided. The more time I spent with Ralph, the more I found myself drawn to him. He was so different from John Paul, so attentive and caring. He made me feel special, something I hadn't felt in a long time. I knew it was wrong, that I was betraying John Paul, but I couldn't help myself. I was so lonely, so desperate for connection, and Ralph was there, offering me everything I had been missing. His presence was like a balm to my aching heart, and I found myself craving the way he made me feel, seen, valued, and desired. One night, after a particularly long day, Ralph came over to the house. Lucas was already asleep, and the house was quiet, the kind of quiet that felt heavy and suffocating. We talked for hours, and before I knew it, we were kissing. It was passionate and intense, and for a moment, I forgot about everything else. The guilt, the loneliness, the pain, it all melted away in the heat of the moment. But as the reality of what we were doing set in, I pulled away, guilt washing over me like a tidal wave. I knew I had crossed a line, one that I could never uncross. But even as I told myself that it would never happen again, I couldn't deny the way I felt when I was with him. The affair continued, each encounter filled with a mix of passion and guilt. I knew I was risking everything: my marriage, my family, my future, but I couldn't stop myself. Ralph made me feel alive in a way I hadn't in years, and I was addicted to the way he made me feel. But deep down, I knew that it couldn't last. I was living a lie, and sooner or later, the truth would come out. The weight of my betrayal grew heavier with each passing day, and I found myself torn between the love I still felt for John Paul and the intoxicating pull of Ralph's affection. I was trapped in a web of my own making, and I didn't know how to escape. The guilt was eating me alive. Every time I was with Ralph, I felt a pang of remorse, a deep sense of betrayal towards John Paul. I knew what I was doing was wrong, but I couldn't seem to stop myself. The passion between Ralph and me was too intense, too consuming. We would meet in secret, stealing moments together whenever we could. It was thrilling and terrifying all at once, and I felt like I was living a double life. The weight of my actions pressed down on me, but I pushed it aside, telling myself that I deserved this, that I needed this. But deep down, I knew I was lying to myself. One afternoon, Ralph and I were in his car, parked in a secluded spot near the harbor. The windows were fogged up, and the air was thick with the scent of our desire. We were lost in each other, completely consumed by the moment. But as we were caught up in our passion, we didn't notice the figure approaching the car. It wasn't until the door was yanked open that we realized we had been caught. John Paul stood there, his face a mask of fury and betrayal. His eyes burned with a rage I had never seen before, and his hands were clenched into fists at his sides. He had come home early, and when he couldn't find me at the house, he had gone looking for me. The look in his eyes was one of pure devastation, and I felt my heart shatter into a million pieces. He didn't say a word, just turned and walked away, leaving me to face the consequences of my actions. The days that followed were a blur of pain and regret. John Paul's anger was palpable, and it filled the house like a storm. He barely spoke to me, his silence more punishing than any words could have been. When he finally did confront me, his voice was cold and sharp, cutting through me like a knife. "How could you do this to us?" he demanded, his eyes blazing with hurt and anger. "I trusted you, Hannah. I loved you. And you threw it all away for what? For him?" I had no answers, no excuses. All I could do was stand there, tears streaming down my face, as he unleashed his fury. He didn't raise his hand to me, but his words were enough to leave me broken. "You've destroyed everything," he said, his voice trembling with emotion. "Everything we built, everything we had, it's gone. And for what? A moment of weakness? A moment of selfishness?" I wanted to beg for his forgiveness, to tell him that I was sorry, that I would do anything to make it right. But I knew that no words could undo the damage I had done. The trust between us was shattered, and I had no one to blame but myself. John Paul's anger was justified, and I knew that I had to face the consequences of my actions. But even as I accepted my punishment, I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of loss. I had lost the love of my life, and I knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The days that followed were a blur of pain and regret. John Paul's anger was palpable, and it filled the house like a storm. He barely spoke to me, his silence more punishing than any words could have been. When he finally did confront me, his voice was cold and sharp, cutting through me like a knife. "How could you do this to us?" he demanded, his eyes blazing with hurt and anger. "I trusted you, Hannah. I loved you. And you threw it all away for what? For him?" I had no answers, no excuses. All I could do was stand there, tears streaming down my face, as he unleashed his fury. He didn't raise his hand to me, but his words were enough to leave me broken. "You've destroyed everything," he said, his voice trembling with emotion. "Everything we built, everything we had, it's gone. And for what? A moment of weakness? A moment of selfishness?" I wanted to beg for his forgiveness, to tell him that I was sorry, that I would do anything to make it right. But I knew that no words could undo the damage I had done. The trust between us was shattered, and I had no one to blame but myself. John Paul's anger was justified, and I knew that I had to face the consequences of my actions. But even as I accepted my punishment, I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of loss. I had lost the love of my life, and I knew that nothing would ever be the same again. John Paul's confrontation with Ralph was even more intense. He stormed into the office, his face a mask of fury, and didn't waste any time. He grabbed Ralph by the collar, slamming him against the wall. "You think you can just take what's mine?" he growled, his voice low and dangerous. "You think you can come into my life and destroy everything I've worked for?" Ralph tried to stammer out an apology, but John Paul wasn't having it. He punched him, the sound of his fist connecting with Ralph's face echoing through the office. "You're fired," he spat, his voice filled with venom. "If I ever see you near my family again, you'll regret it." The emotion in John Paul's eyes was raw and unfiltered. It wasn't just anger, it was pain, deep and unrelenting. He had trusted Ralph, had considered him a friend, and that betrayal cut just as deep as mine. As he walked away, his shoulders slumped, and I could see the weight of everything pressing down on him. He was a man broken by the actions of those he had trusted most, and it killed me to know that I had played a part in that. That night, John Paul and I sat in silence, the air between us heavy with unspoken words. The love that had once filled our home was gone, replaced by a void that seemed impossible to bridge. I wanted to reach out to him, to tell him how sorry I was, but I knew that no amount of apologies could fix what had been broken. The emotion in the room was overwhelming, a mix of anger, pain, and regret that neither of us knew how to navigate. We were two people who had once been inseparable, now strangers in the same house, bound together by the remnants of a love that had been shattered. In the end, John Paul and I decided to separate. It was a painful decision, but we both knew that it was the right thing to do. The trust between us was gone, and without that, there was no foundation for our relationship to stand on. We agreed to co-parent Lucas, to put his needs above our own, but the love that had once bound us together was no longer enough to keep us together. I moved out of the house, taking Lucas with me. It was a difficult transition, but I knew that it was necessary. I had to face the consequences of my actions, to take responsibility for the pain I had caused. And though it was hard, I knew that I had to do it for Lucas, for the future that I still hoped to build for him. As I settled into my new life, I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of regret. I had lost the love of my life, the man who had once been my everything, because of my own selfishness. I had betrayed him, and in doing so, I had betrayed myself. But I knew that I couldn't change the past, that all I could do was move forward and try to be a better person, a better mother, for Lucas. And though the road ahead would be difficult, I knew that I had to face it with courage and determination. I had made a mistake, but I was determined to learn from it, to grow from it, and to become the person I knew I could be.
If you like this story and felt connected, please subscribe. Thanks for watching Gaby's cheating stories. See you on the next one.